rain was falling hard, squeezing the road into a curtain of water that seemed to have no end. Emily was pressing the steering wheel, tired eyes and scattered thoughts. The journey back home was becoming endless, and she could barely distinguish the road lines through the dense darkness of night. Around her, the world seemed to be swallowed up by the storm, and she wondered if she could really keep her eyes open. It was dawn, and she was alone, as always, following an empty road that never seemed to end. The only company was the sound of rain hitting the windshield and the constant noise of tires on wet asphalt. She looked in the rear view. Nothing. Only darkness. A sigh escaped from her lips, and she adjusted the mirror to try to concentrate. It was then that he saw the headlights, a sudden glow coming from nowhere, illuminating what appeared to be a human form in front of him. The SUV was parked on the roadside, with headlights on and hood down. Emily hesitated, her eyes blurred by the water running through the window, reflecting the light of the headlights. She paused, her mind trying to figure out what to do. The road was deserted, and there was no sign of any other car nearby. She had never liked stopping in places like this, especially at night, but the figure in the car seemed to be the only other person for miles. She slowed down and pulled over the side, her tires scraping on wet ground. The glass went down slowly, a little more than necessary, just enough to hear the voice that came from the other side, cold and urgent. "Hi, can you help us? Our car broke down, and we are out of cell phone signal." The voice was of a man. He was alone, but his tone was hasty, almost as if he had something in mind beyond simple explanation. Emily looked around, an uncomfortable feeling invading her. In the passenger seat, a woman watched her silently. Something in those eyes made her alert, but she swallowed the discomfort. Maybe it was just the loneliness and rain. She looked at the road, then back to the two of them, pondering. "I can call a tow for you," she said, with a trembling voice, but trying to stay calm. "I wasn't willing to stop for long." The man looked at the woman, and the woman looked at him. There was something in the exchange of looks that made Emily's stomach turn. The man then approached the window, and the smile that was directed to him was too cold to be sincere. No, it's not necessary. We just need a quick, real little help," he said, with a more insistent tone, without the same air of previous urgency. Emily felt a shiver in her spine. Something was wrong, but she couldn't figure out what. She looked at the back seat of the SUV, where the shadows seemed denser than normal, and her eyes shone with something indescribable. Before he could think any more, the man put his hand on the window, quickly and firmly. She instinctively backed away, but had no time to react. He pulled something out of his pocket, a gun. Fear froze her muscles. The gun was there, right in front of her. Her heart shot and she had no time to reason. The woman next to the driver smiled, a wide smile, but without joy. Emily felt the pressure in her throat, as if the air had been drawn from her lungs. "Let's get out of the car," the man said, with a disturbing calm. With her heart in her throat, Emily had no choice. She stepped out of the car, her legs swinging in her mind in shock. The man pushed her into the back seat of the SUV, and the woman followed her, the heavy footsteps echoing in the rain. Inside the car, the air was heavy. Emily shrunk, feeling small, vulnerable. The driver, now with his gun pointed at her, stared at the road as if there was no hurry. Emily felt a shiver running through her spine. It was as if she was being taken, unable to defend herself, to a place she did not know where it was. The man did not speak, but the woman from the passenger seat watched her with piercing eyes, without turning away. The SUV drove down the road, the car lights cutting off the darkness like a specter. Emily tried to think of an exit, but words seemed to fail. The car kept sliding through the night, and with each kilometer, the feeling of terror spread faster than the rain that hit the windows. She knew that her only chance was fading quickly, as the road ahead of her, increasingly distant from the safe place she thought she was. But it was too late to go back. The nightmare had begun, and she did not know where it would end. The car drove a few more miles without Emily could distinguish the direction. The road seemed an infinite stretch of wet asphalt, winding through tall trees and distant silhouettes. The rain did not give signs of truce, and the sound of water beating against the glass mixed with the fast beat of his heart. Every second she felt more trapped, more exposed. The man behind the wheel seemed calm, too much for a situation like that. The woman next to him, in silence, did not take her eyes off Emily, as if she was waiting for something. The feeling of confinement was suffocating. Emily took a deep breath, trying to keep calm, looking for something, anything, that could help her escape from this situation. Fear grew within her, and the logic of her mind seemed to fail. They had taken her away from any familiar place, and her only hope now was to find a way out. It was when she saw the lights in the distance, a faint headlight in the middle of darkness. A gas station. The vision was a promise of security, a point of contact with the outside world. Perhaps there she could ask for help, perhaps there was the place where her escape became possible. With a survival instinct, she straightened herself in the back seat, trying to control her breath. The rain seemed to have worsened, but at the same time the sight of that post seemed a relief, an escape point. Emily felt her tension go down a little, but only a little. She knew she couldn't let her guard down. They wouldn't let her off without fighting. The car made a turn toward the gas station, and she almost felt a sigh of relief escape from her lips. But he soon realized that he was not sure whether he was relieved or if he was even more frightened by the idea of being so close to civilization and at the same time completely helpless. The SUV stopped in front of the small shop at the gas station. The man turned off the engine, but did not get out of the car. The woman looked at Emily once more, with an enigmatic smile on her lips. Something in her expression made her even more uneasy, as if she knew something that Emily did not. "Stay here," the man ordered, before getting out of the car. Emily hesitated, feeling the weight of the gun still in her mind, but she had no choice. The man quickly moved away to the gas station shop, leaving Emily with her wife. The silence inside the car was almost unbearable. The woman did not say a word. She just watched, with that unsettling smile. Emily wasted no time. Taking advantage of the distraction, she opened the door with a desperate speed and ran to the gas station, feet sliding on wet asphalt. Her body moved in a reflex, without thinking. She did not dare to look back, knowing that it would be the last thing she could do. His only chance was to run and find some kind of refuge. Entering the shop, the attendant, a middle-aged man with a tired face, looked surprised. He seemed to be waiting for a customer, but never someone like that, scared and wet. Emily barely had time to talk. She quickly approached the counter, with her breath choppy, and said in a trembling voice. The attendant looked at her with an undecipherable expression, and a feeling of discomfort ran through Emily's veins. Something was wrong. The man seemed to hesitate, as if he was pondering a decision. The door of the store opened, and the man and woman in the SUV entered, looking too calm for someone who had just committed a kidnapping. "Are you okay, lady?" the attendant asked, staring at her, but with a tone that seemed almost of empathy. Emily opened her mouth to answer, but the woman, who was now standing next to the man, spoke before. "She doesn't need help, sir. We're just giving a ride to a friend." The woman's response caused a cold sensation to rise up through Emily's spine. The phrase was too casual, as if the kidnapping was something trivial. The attendant looked disconcerted, and Emily, not knowing who to trust, looked at the door. Outside, the two kidnappers were still standing, looking at her. "Will you help me?" Emily whispered to the attendant, the anguish in her voice. The man behind the counter looked at the door and then approached it, lowering his voice. "You shouldn't have come here." The tone was serious and loaded with something that Emily could not identify. Those words sounded like a sentence. He looked at the kidnappers outside and stepped towards the door, closing the store's protective curtain. Before she could react, he turned to Emily, his eyes wide. "There is no way out of here, and they don't want you to go." Emily's mind was spinning in despair. What did he mean by that? The attendant looked out of the window and then approached her again, speaking in a low tone, almost a whisper. "They won't kill you, not yet. But you must be very important to them. Much more than you think." The kidnappers were now closer. Emily looked out of the window, feeling terror take over her again. They were waiting. But why? And what did the attendant mean by that? Was she just being watched, or was there something much greater, much darker going on there that rainy night? The weight of doubt and fear crushed her, as she tried to understand whether her escape had really begun, or if, in fact, it was just falling into another trap. The rain seemed to have intensified as Emily stood there inside the gas station shop, her body trembling with cold and dread. The attendant stood behind the counter, watching the kidnappers from outside, and the feeling of being in a nightmare intensified every second. The two men, now standing in the middle of the street, watched her with a terrifying calm. There was no hurry, no shouting. Only a silent and relentless vigilance. You can't leave, not now," the attendant said in a somber tone. "They'll find you no matter what you do." Emily swallowed it dry. The fear squeezed her throat, making it hard to breathe. I didn't know if that man was trying to help her or if he was just playing with her mind. What did he mean by, "They don't want you to go away"? Who were they? Her brain was a mess, a mix of thoughts and unanswered questions. She wanted to scream, but fear prevented her from making a sound. She looked at the attendant, trying to read his face, looking for any hint of truth in his words. But he was distant, as if he was attached to some kind of consciousness that Emily could not reach. "Why didn't they shoot me?" she whispered, the voice almost inaudible. "Why didn't they kill me when they had the chance?" The attendant hesitated for a moment, as if pondering whether or not to speak. His eyes briefly turned to the window, where the kidnappers were still standing, before turning to her. "They're playing a game with you." The response was low, almost a whisper. "You are part of it now. This is bigger than you think. It's not about you or them. It's about something much older. Something that even I can't fully understand." Emily was paralyzed, her eyes wide open. What was he saying? What game was this? And why she? His body was beginning to collapse under the weight of doubts and fear. She didn't want to believe the words of the attendant, but there was something in her voice, in her expression, that made her wonder if she was really just in a kidnapping situation, or if there was something much more sinister going on there that night. Something that no one, not even she, could control. She looked at the glass door, where the two kidnappers were still waiting. The man, who before seemed so calm, was now more restless, his posture tense, as if he felt the tension in the air. The woman next to him looked different, with a smile almost imperceptible, but her eyes shining in a way that Emily could not explain. They knew something she didn't. It was when the attendant, with a serious expression, approached her and lowered his voice even more, as if he feared being heard. "Don't trust them," he said. "They're not human. None of us are. They're part of something bigger that's watching. And you, Emily, have something they want. It's not a ride that you were giving them. It's a offer. You're the final piece." Those words exploded in Emily's mind like a bolt of lightning. What did he mean? She tried to process, but the truth seemed to escape her at every moment. She looked at the kidnappers, now approaching the store. She didn't know who to trust anymore, and every second, the feeling of being watched, manipulated, increased. "What do they want from me?" Emily asked, her voice hoarse and desperate. "What's going on? Who are they?" The attendant hesitated again, as if he was afraid to continue, but then, with a resigned sigh, he approached close enough that no one else would listen. They are a part of a cycle. A cycle that repeats itself. You have something in you, Emily. Something that was put there long before you were born. They want you to be part of it. That is the key to release what is trapped. You are the last piece to complete the game. Emily took a step back, feeling a knot forming in her stomach. His body was frozen, and his eyes turned to the shop window where the two kidnappers were now standing at the door, ready to enter. Something in them was different now. The woman smiled, and the man simply looked at her with an unspeakable coldness. The gas station door opened, and the wind loaded with rain came in. The man and woman came closer, but something in the way they moved made Emily feel like they were no longer so human. Their eyes shone, and she felt the air around her become dense, as if being enveloped by an invisible force. Something was about to happen. "You cannot run away," said the man, his voice deep and almost intoned as if he were talking about something beyond his comprehension. "You can't come back. You're already here. And there's no way out." The woman approached slowly, with that persistent smile, and whispered, "The game has begun. Now, you will be ours. Forever." Fear took hold of Emily in an overwhelming way, but at the same time, a strange sense of resignation enveloped her. She tried to understand what was happening, but the words of the attendant echoed in her mind. "You are the last piece." Suddenly, everything around her was silent. The wind stopped, the rain stopped. And for a moment it seemed that nothing else existed. The kidnappers were standing still, looking at her with empty eyes, as if they were waiting for her. The truth, which she did not want to accept, was clear before her. Whatever it was, the game now involved her. There was no way out. With one last breath, Emily felt her body being pulled as if she was sucked into an unknown abyss, and in the deep darkness of the night she realized that she might never have a chance to escape. The cycle had begun, and she was now part of it. The road seemed endless. For hours, the only sound that broke the silence was the constant roar of the car's engine and the headlight that cut through the darkness, illuminating only the tarmac in front. The lights of the city had been left behind, and the emptiness of the country road was all that Ethan knew now. He was accustomed to lonely journeys. It was a necessary break from his busy life, full of commitments and meetings. The tranquility of the road gave him a sense of freedom, as if for some moments he could escape from everything and everyone. He looked in the rear-view mirror, observing the continuous line of lights from the cars that followed him, far enough away already to feel isolated. Only the vastness of night surrounded him. Then he saw him. A figure by the side of the road, hands raised, hitchhiking. Ethan hesitated for a moment. It was not common to see someone at that point of the road. He was miles from any city, in a stretch where the road lights were weak and the trees around seemed to swallow the sight. But somehow that figure seemed familiar, a silent plea for help which inexplicably touched something inside him. He slowed down and stopped. The man, with an anxious expression on his face, quickly approached. Thank you very much," the man said, relieved. He had a careless appearance, shaggy hair and a beard to be done, but his eyes were intensely attentive, as if they did not stop looking for something in the darkness. The car broke down. "We're on our way to a gas station up ahead, and we can't push anymore. Can you help us?" Ethan looked at the car parked by the roadside, an old model, rusty in appearance, but still seemed functional. The man next to him spoke hastily, with an urgency that Ethan could not ignore. Something in his voice, a subtle pressure, made Ethan's instinct to help be activated without much questioning. "Sure, it's not far." "Jump back there," Ethan said, pointing to the back seat. The man entered quickly, and soon after, more figures appeared in the darkness. A young woman, with pale face and pierced eyes, walked towards the car with hasty steps. She was visibly nervous, her fingers squeezing the handle of the bag she carried, and her eyes seemed to keep moving, as if something was watching them. The older woman, with an impassive countenance and glassy eyes, came right behind, as if she was crawling down the road. Finally, an older man with thin hair and a calm expression too for the context completed the group. He seemed distant, as if not really there, his gaze lost somewhere far beyond that road. Ethan watched them as they got into the car, each one settling in strangely, without talking to each other. The older man sat down next to him, and the younger woman crouched in the back seat. The older woman settled into a silence that seemed to carry more questions than answers. "It's just a little further ahead." "Don't worry," Ethan said, trying to break the ice, though a feeling of discomfort began to take hold of his chest. The man next to him just shook his head without saying anything, keeping his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The journey continued quietly. The sound of tires on the asphalt was the only noise that accompanied the pace of the deserted road. Ethan looked out the window, trying to ignore the growing sense that something was wrong. Something in the people in the car didn't seem to hit. They did not look at each other, did not speak, and the expressions on their faces were fixed, as if they were somewhere else, or perhaps waiting for something. The younger woman started to move in the bag frantically, taking and storing things without apparent reason. She looked at the older man, but he did not react. She paused, her eyes now facing Ethan, as if she was looking at him more intensely than usual. "Is everything okay?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes," she replied quickly, her voice trembling. I'm just nervous." Ethan forced a smile, but the discomfort did not go away. He could feel a tension in the air, a feeling that the night had stretched beyond normal. The horizon ahead seemed farther, the sky without stars, and the feeling of loneliness that always accompanied him on these roads now seemed to become oppressive. He looked in the rear-view mirror once more and realized that their car was closer than expected. The headlights were shining, but something seemed wrong with the way the lights moved. The road was empty behind them, but the reflection of the car seemed not to have disappeared. Something was watching, or perhaps the observer was him. "Shall we get to the post soon?" asked the older woman with impersonal voice. His eyes were fixed on the way, but his tone did not suggest concern. Ethan didn't know how to answer. The post seemed to be farther away than he remembered. The silence in the car was dense, heavy, and as the darkness deepened he could no longer trust his own thoughts. The post was becoming a distant sight, and the road now seemed to have no end. Ethan's car reached the gas station as headlights cut through the dense darkness. The place looked deserted, with only a single bomb illuminated by a weak beam of light. The post was still, without movement, as if time had stopped there, frozen. There were no other cars, and the old brick building seemed to have been abandoned for years, its windows dirty and opaque, the doors locked except for one of them, which was half open, as if invited to enter. Ethan stopped the car in front of the bomb, trying to keep calm. The older man next to him had not spoken a word since they got into the vehicle. The young woman was absorbed, staring out of the window, while the older woman remained silent, like a shadow in the back seat. Ethan felt a weight on his chest, a feeling of claustrophobia that made him want to get out of the car, but at the same time he felt like he was stuck there. "Come on," he said, trying to break the silence. The man next to him did not respond, but his eyes were more alert, watching each movement around. He looked out the window at the post and then at the car they had left behind. Something in his expression made Ethan realize that he also felt the same unease. They got out of the car. The older man walked to the station with slow steps, as if he was not in a hurry. The women followed him, but Ethan stayed behind for a moment, trying to process what he felt. There was something wrong there, something that could not be defined. He felt watched, but when he looked at the trees around, he saw no one. The light of the post blinked briefly, and a strange cold ran through his spine. He looked towards the building and saw something moving in the twilight of the entrance. The silhouette of a tall and bent figure, as if waiting for him. But, when blinking, the figure disappeared, leaving only the emptiness of the post. "Hey, are you going in or not?" The voice of the young woman pulled him out of the trance. She was standing by the door, staring at the entrance to the post. "Sure," he replied, forcing a smile. "I was just looking." He followed the group into the outpost, the air heavy and stuffy. The smell of oil and gasoline mixed with dust seemed to be soaked in the walls. Inside, the room was completely silent, except for the sound of Ethan's own breath, which seemed to echo on the walls. The counter was empty, with no attendant in sight, and the dim overhead lights flickered at an uncomfortable cadence. The older man went to the counter and started to move some papers cluttered, as if looking for something. The young woman approached one of the shelves and took a can of soda, watching it for a moment before returning the can unopened. The older woman stood, watching the door half open, her eyes fixed on the darkness outside. "Do you have a phone?" asked the older woman, her voice without emotion. She seemed as out of place as the post itself, a presence disconnected from everything around. Ethan couldn't answer immediately. He didn't know why, but her request made him feel even more uncomfortable. It didn't seem like a simple question. It was as if she was testing something. "We have to wait," the older man said suddenly, turning to the group. He finally spoke something, but his voice was drawn and drowsy, as if he spoke out of will. "They must be coming." "They?" Ethan asked, his voice tense. The older man didn't respond. Instead, he walked away from the counter and to the door that was ajar. Ethan had no time to react. He heard the sound of a car approaching the post, its lights shining in the distance. The group of strangers also seemed to notice, their tense bodies and their expressions changing. The man next to Ethan looked quickly at the door, as if waiting for something, or someone. When the car arrived, Ethan felt a shiver run through his spine. It was a luxury SUV, dark, with darkened windows. The vehicle stopped in front of the post, and two mysterious figures came down from it. They were tall, with dark clothes and precise movements, as if they had come out of a shadow. One of them, a woman, wore sunglasses even at night, and her presence seemed to surround the environment with an aura of imminent danger. The other, a man with a piercing look, looked directly at Ethan, as if he knew everything about him. The mood at the post changed immediately. The tension, which was already in the air, became palpable. The group members who were with Ethan began to move faster, as if they were aware of something he did not understand. The young woman began to walk from side to side, nervous, and the older man shook his head as if trying to convince himself of something. "Who are they?" Ethan asked, his voice lowering from so uncomfortable he felt. "Don't worry," the man next to you said, with a strange smile. "They have what we need." Ethan didn't answer. The sound of the SUV's engine still echoed, and for a moment he found himself immersed in a sense of latent terror. The gas station, which until then seemed to be a simple stopping point, was now a scene full of mystery and danger. He felt the presence of the two strangers as a threat, something that he could not understand, but was getting closer and closer, like a predator who knows that the prey is about to do the wrong thing. The SUV with the two mysterious figures was parked in silence in front of the station. The woman with sunglasses and the man with a piercing look were standing, watching Ethan's group as if they were waiting for something. Ethan could feel their presence as if it were an invisible wall, a pressure in the air, as if the whole environment was conspiring against him. "Why did it take so long?" the older man suddenly asked, with a hoarse voice. He seemed to be expecting something, but was not speaking directly to Ethan. His concern was not about what was happening around him, but something else. Something that Ethan still did not understand. The young woman, who was on one side of the post, began to walk from one side to the other, eyes fixed on the door half open, as if she could not keep in a place for long. Her anxiety was palpable. Every movement of her seemed to accelerate the beat of her heart, as if she was preparing for an imminent escape. "They have what we need," the man next to Ethan repeated, his words disconnected. Ethan was beginning to understand what was going on. He could feel the tension growing, as if he was in a chess game, where he had already fallen into a trap without knowing. The woman with sunglasses approached the group with long and firm steps. She looked directly at Ethan, his relentless expression as if weighing each of his movements. The man next to him stood still, his eyes fixed on the post, as if he was waiting for a sign. "You helped us this far," she said, her voice low but clear. "Now, you will help in another way." Ethan felt a chill running through his spine. Something was very wrong. The simple gesture of helping them, of giving a ride, was turning into something much bigger. He tried to step back, but his feet seemed to weigh, as if the ground was sticking to him, as if he could not escape. "What do you want?" He tried to keep his voice steady, but there was no certainty in his words. The older man stepped forward, almost as if he was taking the lead. He looked at Ethan, and his eyes were empty, as if everything that was said or done at that moment had already been decided. "We don't want anything," he said with a frightening calm. "We've already taken everything we need." Before Ethan could answer, the woman in sunglasses approached him with a subtle smile. "But you can help yet," she said, and the way she said it made Ethan's throat dry. "You have helped, and it was not in vain." Suddenly, the surrounding environment seemed to become more muted, more claustrophobic. The light of the post blinked again, stronger this time, and the shadows on the walls seemed to grow, gaining life of their own. The sound of the wind in the trees outside sounded like a macabre song. Something was about to happen, and Ethan knew he had no control over anything there. The SUV, which was still stationary, seemed to observe every movement, every gesture of the group, as if it was waiting for the right time to intervene. Then it was when the other figure, the man with the piercing look, took a step forward, breaking the silence with a simple question, but full of threat. "You know what the price is, don't you?" he said, looking directly at Ethan. The cold took hold of his body, and a feeling of genuine fear settled in. Ethan swallowed dry, trying to understand what it meant. He felt that somehow he was becoming part of something much bigger than he had imagined when he offered the ride. The man continued, "You are the payment. The price for your own freedom." And with those words, everything became clearer, but the clarity brought even more dread. They did not need help. They did not want help. They were just using it, manipulating it, as a piece in a deadly game. Ethan looked at the gas station, at the figures approaching him, and for the first time he felt the real weight of his choice. He was no longer just helping someone. He was stuck. "It's too late to run," the woman in sunglasses said, her voice low as a warning. "We're already here." The moment the words came out of his mouth, the environment around Ethan seemed to close. The noise of the wind ceased, the lights of the post began to flash frantically, and somehow he knew he was at the center of something much deeper and more terrifying than anything he could comprehend. "There is no way out," the man of piercing look said, with a terrifying coldness. "We are in control." Ethan felt the pressure in his chest increase, as if the air was being taken from him. He did not know what would happen next, but knew that nothing else would be as before. Ethan barely had time to react. The man's words of piercing gaze still echoed in his mind, and suddenly he felt that the ground under his feet was no longer safe. It was as if everything around him had changed, distorted. The lights of the post blinked more intensely, and the sound of the wind, which before seemed harmless, now had a threatening tone, as if he was murmuring secrets of something terrible that was to come. "You don't get it yet, do you?" The woman in the sunglasses stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Ethan. "We're not here to hurt you. Not directly." The way she said that made Ethan feel a shiver in his spine. He felt the pressure on his chest increase, as if being crushed by an invisible force. "So what do they want from me?" Ethan asked, trying to keep calm, even though he knew his voice was failing. He had no control over anything anymore. "I was completely lost in that situation." The older man took a step toward the post, his movement slow as if he already knew what was coming. He looked at the post with a look of nostalgia, as if saying goodbye to something. "The price is your life," he said, in a low voice, as if speaking to himself. "But not how you think." Ethan frowned. "My life?" It was the woman in sunglasses who answered. "You knew something was wrong. You felt that when you picked us up on the road. You knew something was going on there. And now you'll understand." She pointed to the parked SUV, and the man with a penetrating look went up to the vehicle, opening the door with an abrupt movement. From inside, he took out an object that Ethan did not recognize immediately. It was a box, simple, without anything special, but seemed to have an indescribable power over him. The man held the box for a moment, before handing it to the older man, who now seemed to be in a trance. "This box," the older man said, "has the power to control everything around us. It brought us here. And now, it will take you." Ethan felt a sense of growing despair. He wanted to scream, run, but couldn't. Something in the atmosphere of that place was holding him, preventing any movement. "The box." The woman began, but her voice was interrupted by the sudden sound of a low laugh coming from inside the SUV. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was low, stuffy, as if something, or someone, was having fun with the fear he was feeling. The man with the piercing look emerged from the shadow of the SUV, holding the box. "It's too late to hide, Ethan," he said with an enigmatic smile. "You have already been chosen." Ethan's heart shot. "Chosen?" "Yes," the man replied, with a disturbing calm. "Chosen to be part of what will come. To pay the price for our freedom." Then the woman with sunglasses approached Ethan, putting the box in his hands, with a firm gesture. "Open. That's what you have to do." Ethan looked at the box, his body in shock. He felt as if something pulled him, as if the box had life of its own. He knew he had no choice. His survival instinct was crying for him to fight, to run away. But something else, something bigger, seemed to be in control now. With trembling hands, he opened the box. And when he did, a bright and painful light illuminated everything around him, blinding him for a moment. It was as if reality were breaking apart. The gas station disappeared, and Ethan was transported to a different place, an empty space without end. The feeling of being lost in a dense fog, not knowing where it was overwhelming. Inside the box, Ethan found a key. It was simple, made of dark metal, but emitted palpable power. When he took her, the vision around him was further distorted. He felt as if he was being pulled into himself, as if the key were the door to a place far beyond human comprehension. "Now do you understand?" the voice of the older man echoed around you. "Now you're part of it. There's no turning back." Ethan looked at the void around him, and for the first time he realized what he had done. He had become part of the game, part of the price. He was no longer in control, not even of his own life. "But there is a way out," the woman in sunglasses said, her voice now distant, almost like an echo. "And you will pay for it." The last thing Ethan heard was the man's penetrating-looking laugh, a laugh that seemed to have no end. And then the void swallowed him up, and everything disappeared. Heavy rain fell on the deserted highway, the drops hitting the windshield with an almost inhuman force. The constant sound of the windshield wiper was Michael's only company that lonely night. He drove on the road, his mind absorbed in the emptiness of the journey. Sometimes the car's headlight briefly illuminated the dark trees that stretched along the road, like restless shadows. There was no other car in sight, and the feeling of isolation was almost tangible. The only thing that accompanied him was the muffled hum of the radio, trying to break the silence with a distant music. Michael had never cared much for lonely trips. Over the years, they became a reflection of his boring routine, a temporary escape from life that in some ways seemed to have no purpose anymore. He was in no hurry. The deserted road, lit only by the dim light of the headlights, was his only company that rainy dawn. It was then that he saw something on the roadside. A figure. A man standing, holding a hand in front of his face, as if trying to protect himself from the pouring rain. The silhouette wriggled, as if asking for help. Michael slowed down, a compassionate impulse running through his chest. The road was empty. There was no one else around, and the man seemed in trouble. The car headlight briefly illuminated the stranger's face. He was wet, with his hair stuck to his face and dirty clothes, as if he had been thrown out of some disaster. But the look he found in the rearview mirror was not that of someone desperate, it was that of someone with a certain emptiness. A tension in the air, which Michael could not explain. He hesitated. The road was dangerous, and on a night like that, stopping could be a mistake. But, once again, the man's vision touched him in some way. A strange and heavy feeling hovered over him, but Michael did not think twice before stopping the car. He lowered the window slowly. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the long journey. The man approached, the steps hesitant. His eyes were large, alert, but with something disturbing in its background. "Please," he said, with a trembling voice. "Help me. My car broke down and I'm lost." Michael observed the man more closely. His clothes were soaked, but the bruises he exhibited seemed recent, as if the body had been dragged by some accident. He blinked a few times, still suspicious. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer, trying to break the tension in the air. "Yes," the man replied with a slight stiffness in his voice. "I'm just trying to get home." He looked sideways, as if he feared something other than rain. Michael felt a chill. Something was wrong, but he didn't know what it was. He was just a wounded man in need of help, or maybe not. Something didn't fit, but he couldn't just leave it there. "Come in. I can take you to the nearest hospital," Michael said, trying to ignore the growing discomfort. The man looked at him as if he was pondering something. Finally, with a muffled sigh, he approached and got into the car. The door closed with a muffled sound, and Michael accelerated, resuming the dark and silent road. But as he drove, something hovered in the air, like an unspoken warning. The man next to him was too quiet. Are you okay?" Michael asked, breaking the silence. The stranger raised his head and looked at him with an intensity that made Michael feel even more uncomfortable. "I am," he replied, vaguely, the voice sounding strangely muffled. Michael felt a growing restlessness. The raindrops were popping against the glass, but the silence inside the car seemed deafening. He tried to focus on the road ahead, but the feeling that something was wrong did not leave him alone. The man, still wet and with his eyes fixed on the road, did not seem to be in panic or pain. But there was something about his behavior that bothered Michael. Something he couldn't identify. He didn't know if he wanted to know. The rain increased, the car headlights lighting up the void ahead. The road seemed endless. The stranger turned slowly to him, as if he had read his thoughts. "Will you help me, right?" he asked in his low voice, as if the answer was already obvious. Michael felt a chill in his stomach. He didn't know the answer. The car was moving slowly, the raindrops incessantly hitting the glass, creating a muffled sound that seemed to swallow any other noise. Michael was looking at the road ahead, the light of the headlights cutting through the darkness like a sharp blade, but something bothered him. The presence of the stranger beside him seemed to weigh in the air, as if the car had become too small a place for both. "How long till the hospital?" Michael asked, trying to break the silence. The man next to him did not respond immediately. For a moment, it seemed he was not going to answer, as if he had lost himself in his own thoughts. Finally, he moved, and in a low voice said, "Not much." Michael frowned, looking quickly at the stranger. The answer didn't sound genuine. "Don't you have a cell phone? Maybe we should call first, let them know you're coming." The stranger turned his head to him, the intense look. No need. I'm fine." "Don't worry," he replied, his voice tense. Michael's restlessness increased. He forced a smile and concentrated on the road again, trying to keep his focus. But the silence that hovered in the car now seemed heavier, more uncomfortable. Suddenly the car made a strange sound, like a pop, and the light on the dashboard blinked. Michael looked at the speedometer, and the acceleration started to fail. He pressed the pedal, but the engine made a rough sound, as if it was choking. "What was that?" Michael asked, more to himself, but the stranger replied with a calm that made no sense of the situation. "It's all right. Just a small problem," he said, his voice as if he knew exactly what was going on, but did not hurry to explain. Michael looked at the panel again and frowned. This doesn't seem normal. The car gave another bump, and Michael slowed down, trying to find a safe place to stop. The rain was so heavy that I could barely see the road. He drove to the side of the road, with the engine choking even more. The car stopped abruptly, as if it had died in the middle of the road. "Great," said Michael, a little exasperated. "Now what do we do?" The stranger didn't seem alarmed. He just looked at the dark road ahead. "It's raining hard. Better wait a little," he suggested, as if the car problem was just a minor inconvenience. Michael looked at him with suspicion. It made no sense. The man seemed too calm, as if he knew something was about to happen, or perhaps even that it was not a problem for him. Michael got out of the car to take a look at the engine. The rain was pouring, and he soon soaked. He opened the hood and started to move the engine, but nothing seemed normal. The engine was heating up, and the car did not react. He grumbled, frustrated, and returned to the car. "What are we going to do?" Michael asked, anger and anxiety starting to take over him. The stranger remained silent for a few moments, watching him with a disturbing calm. Then he spoke softly, without turning away from Michael. "Have you noticed the sounds?" Michael frowned. "Sounds? What sounds?" "Listen more carefully. You will hear." Michael was silent, trying to catch what the stranger was saying. At first he didn't notice anything but the sound of rain. But then something peculiar came into the air. A distant sound, like steps on the road. Or maybe it was a person screaming, but muffled, lost in the rain. Michael looked out the window, but saw nothing. "What is it?" he asked, feeling a shiver run through his spine. The stranger just looked at him, with a strange and enigmatic smile. "The road, she does these things," he said, vaguely, as if it were normal. Michael turned the key in the ignition, but the car did not turn. The strange sound was increasing, and now he was beginning to realize that the steps were not just from the road. Something was approaching the darkness, moving among the trees on the roadside. The tension in the air was palpable. "We're being followed," Michael muttered, voice failing, as if he finally realized what was going on. The stranger turned slowly to him, with a look that mixed sympathy and something else, something Michael could not name. "Yes, you are." The sound kept growing. Steps. And now, a murmur indistinct, as if someone was speaking in the rain, his words whispered and indistinct. The feeling of danger was imminent. Michael felt his heart race. "Who's out there?" he asked, his voice tense and almost desperate. The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he stared straight ahead with a faint smile on his lips. "Don't worry. They always come, sooner or later." The sound of footsteps on the road continued, uninterrupted. Michael looked in the rearview mirror but saw nothing but a thick rain curtain. The darkness seemed to swallow any attempt at clarity. The murmur, almost inaudible, increased in volume, as if someone was approaching, or rather, something. The feeling of being observed, of being caught between the rain and the unknown, made his breathing accelerate. "Who's out there?" Michael asked again, his voice trembling. He didn't know if he was asking the stranger or himself. The answer seemed obvious, but at the same time he did not want to believe. The man next to him did not move. He just looked out the window, with that strange smile still on his face, as if he was watching something beyond the storm. "They are coming," he said, with a disturbing calm. "You'll have to decide." "Decide what?" Michael turned to him, now completely alert, the fear starting to take hold. "If you're going to move on with your life, or if you will understand what is happening here," replied the stranger, as if that was a simple choice, a logical decision. But to Michael, it seemed like more of a sentence. "You're going to help me escape, or you're going to join them." Michael frowned, confused. "Join whom?" "Those who come to take what has already been left behind," the man replied in a tone that was neither of explanation nor of justification. "We're all going to the same place, after all." Michael felt a wave of despair. The car seemed tighter now, as if with each breath, the space was shrinking. He tried to start again, but the car didn't start. The sound of the engine dying mixed with the steps on the road, now clearly closer. It was no longer a doubt. Someone, or something, was really coming. He looked out the window, trying to find some vision. Nothing. Only rain and shadows moving slowly. But then something moved on its periphery, on the roadside. Something dark and high. Like a human figure, but strangely distorted, with a movement that did not seem natural. Michael turned sharply to the stranger. "What the hell is that?" The man, who had seemed too calm until then, turned slowly. His eyes, now completely black, reflected no light. He was no longer smiling. "That's the choice you'll make," he muttered, more to himself than to Michael. "You're not helping anyone," Michael cried out, his voice full of panic. He wanted to get out of that car, run off the road, but there was no way out. The rain, the darkness, and the approaching figure were all that remained. "What is happening?" But the man did not answer. He just watched the figure on the road, which now moved faster. Michael could see the shadows stretching out under the dim headlights. The trees swung violently, as if something was moving between them. "I can help you," said the stranger, with the same calm and vague voice as if he were talking about something routine. "But you have to trust me. You already knew this was going to happen." Michael looked at him, his eyes wide, his breath gasping. "I don't know what you are, but I'm going to get out of here." He tried to open the door, but it was locked. Fear took hold of his body like an electric current, his mind confused. He looked again at the road. The figure was now very close. Pale skin, empty eyes, mouth open in a silent cry. Something that was not human. The stranger next to you turned to him. "You have a choice, Michael. And only one. Remember who you are. Remember where you were before all this started." The man's words sounded like a distant echo in Michael's head. He felt a dizziness, a sense of collapse. The figure on the road was now well ahead, his steps dragged. Michael felt the weight of panic, but before he could do anything, the man next to him looked at him one last time. His gaze was now completely empty, like a face of something that no longer existed. The car door finally opened by itself. Michael looked out. The figure was there, right in front of the car. His eyes, lifeless, fixed on it. The rain now seemed more dense, and the darkness even more dense. He had a choice. Run away, or follow that being into the unknown. But his mind didn't know what to choose anymore. He felt a growing pressure on his chest, a feeling of not being able to escape anymore. The stranger disappeared in the rain. And in the end, it was all silence.